I guess my journey began October 16th, 2002. I was actually picking up my daughter from our church preschool. I had my 8-month-old son on my hip. And that day we were kind of late getting out to the car. I was talking to a girlfriend while I buckled my son in his car seat. My back was turned, and my daughter was already in the van. As soon as I stopped talking to my friend, I was ambushed from behind at the church I had been going to for the last 20 years, and a man hit me over the head with what felt like a brick, but turned out to be the end of a 6-inch butcher knife, and he completely disoriented me. And he said, "Get in the van." As my daughter was screaming, trying to get out, he said, "Get in the van if you want your kids to live. Don't look at me, because what I'm going to do to you today is punishable by life in prison, and I'm not going to jail." He picked me up, he threw me in the van, took my driver's license, drove to my home. After he told me he knew where I lived, so I would never be free of him, he drove my 2 children and I out into the Florida Everglades, very deep. And that day he raped me 4 times. Each time that he raped me, either my child had to participate in the rape or I had to hold the hand of my child while he did horrific things to me. So by the end of the day, this man had raped me 4 times. And while he was raping me, he was bragging about how he would never be caught, that he had done this so many times before and he was still out there. And I noticed at the time that he had shaved all his body hair. And he forced me to get rid of the DNA after each rape in a way where it wouldn't be able to be recovered from my body. And he was taunting me, saying, if I allow you to live and you go to the hospital, they'll never find anything. I'm that good. Eventually, after he took me to 2 different banks and cleaned out our accounts, he took us back to the church that he abducted me from, and he left my children and I in the bushes. He parked the van in the bushes, and he laid me down on the floor of the van naked, put a knife in the back of my neck, and forced my daughter to beg not to kill me. And I don't know what happened. I kind of passed out in that moment thinking I was going to die. And moments later, I heard my daughter screaming, "Get up, get up, get up. He's gone." And I stood up. I was completely naked. I stood up, and there he was, just sauntering off like he didn't have a care in the world. And with that, I was completely naked driving a minivan. I didn't know where to go. My daughter was screaming for her father, but obviously I couldn't go to his office. And so I ended up going to my parents' house. And when I got there, I called 911. And the rapist had told me, "Do not call the police. I have a police scanner in my car. I know where you live. I know where your kids go to school. I will come back and kill you." But my father convinced me to call the police. And when that law enforcement officer walked through the door, I think that's the first time I exhaled all day. And they explained to me through the process that they'd be taking me to a hospital. And it wasn't going to be the hospital near my parents' house. It was going to be a hospital about an hour away, an hour and 15 minutes away in traffic, because there was a sane nurse there and they had a rape treatment center. Of course, my husband and my father, they wanted me to be seen right away at the hospital around the corner. But this officer was fantastic in explaining the protocol to us, that if you want to get the best evidence, if you want to have the best kind of victim care, you really need to go to a center that's well equipped. And so I got in a police car by myself, and I drove an hour and 15 minutes to the Rape Crisis Center and underwent a 3-hour exam, only to be told that they found no DNA, they found no hairs, they found nothing in the kit. What they did have was photographs of my genitals and, pictures of, the bruising and the cuts and things like that. But in terms of having any workable evidence, they had none. And then the next day, the police, after impounding my car, let me know that they found absolutely nothing in my van. This man was in my van all day long. He was in every nook and cranny of my car, and they discovered nothing. There were no prints. And I think the feeling of despair I already had as a victim just amplified, because now, who is he? I hadn't seen his face. I had no evidence. I live in a city of 3 million people in Miami at the time, and he could be anybody. Well, luckily for me, 48 hours after that, I got a call, and they said, the DNA lab went over your clothing with a fine-tooth comb. They found a teeny tiny speck of DNA on the inside of your shirt, which is ironic because I didn't have my shirt on for 99% of the day. And they said there was a teeny tiny speck of mixed DNA, and they tested it. And for me, the lab in Miami at the time had, no sizable backlog. They tested everything right away, and it came back with a hit on another case, same MO, abducted from a Presbyterian church. The mother was taken to the Everglades, raped, and so they see this guy's a serial rapist, but we have no identity in the system. And so whereas it prompted the city of Miami to form a task force to search for him and put a lot of pressure on the case, he still could be anybody. And luckily for me, an innocent bystander called in a domestic violence call. My assault happened in October. In January, innocent bystander called in a domestic violence call. He was beating up his 4-month pregnant girlfriend, and at a hotel or a motel down in Homestead, Florida. And when the police came, they printed him, and he gave up a voluntary DNA swab. He didn't have to do it, but he did it because he was that cocky. He believed, at this point they haven't caught me, nobody's going to catch me. So he gave up the DNA swab, and Miami-Dade ran it right away, which was odd because they had been swabbing, everybody that they stopped over the course of 4 months that would give up a sample and remotely resembled my rapist. And they tested that swab so quickly, and they came back with a match and an identification. Wow, now I can put a face and a three-dimensional person, to the fear. And it still took 2 months. He was on the loose, stole a car, he went to South Carolina, but then he made a mistake and he came back to Florida. And through the show America's Most Wanted, they were able to, the officers that found him sleeping on the side of the road were able to make an identification, and that's how he was caught. But I can't describe what this experience was like. It was, it destroyed my family. We're stronger now, and, we're filled with hope, and things are moving forward, but it destroys you for so long. And the criminal justice system is more complicated than people think. We had never been involved with any kind of crime. And from the day he was finally arrested until my trial took place was 4 years. That's a really long time to, keep getting continuances. He went through 6 attorneys, and every time my 3.5-year-old daughter, she grew obviously over time, but from the time she was 3.5 until it went to trial when she was almost 8, she was the only eyewitness since I hadn't made eye contact with him. But she was, jumping around in the car. She gave the sketch. It was reopening the wound for her over and over and over again. And I ended up being the only woman who went to trial on the case. His 3 other victims declined prosecution. They didn't want to do it. Everybody has their reasons, and there was a plea deal put forth, but 30 years didn't seem like enough time for a man who had abducted 4 women and 6 children over the years. And so I went to trial on my own, and he received 7 consecutive life sentences just for what he did to my family and I. He got 3 for the armed kidnappings, and then the judge in Miami-Dade saw fit to sentence him to 4 life sentences, 1 for each time that he raped me. And the closure that comes from something like that isn't a myth. It's a real thing. And my case hung on DNA and that teeny tiny speck, and the testimony of that lab analyst who went up against, a pretty aggressive defense attorney. And so her skill on the stand of being able to defend the DNA, and the DNA itself was what took this guy who had no criminal record. He looked like a choir boy. And although he was a serial rapist, they couldn't introduce that into evidence. So when he started spinning tales that I was a desperate housewife that enjoyed, the thrill of having sex in front of her kids in her van, and it was consensual, things got kind of heated. And so I will be forever indebted to the lab in Miami, to the police officers, and to my prosecutor for giving me the closure I needed to finally get up off the floor of my van and put my life together and now go out and advocate for others.